Hey guys, welcome. Thanks for attending. Diane, do you want to get us started off?
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Diane Mack. I'm with AOTMP, moderator for today's discussion. And as we all enter a new normal in work environments, we face a huge shift from the pandemic. Today, we're talking about how IT can get their budgets back on track with practical steps and insights that are actionable. With us are Shawn Veitz, Vice President at Tellennium, and Tim Colwell, Executive Vice President of AOTMP. Both are veterans in the TEM space. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having us, Diane.
Thanks, Diane.
Let's just dive into this and ask the big question. What are some ways we can get our IT budgets back on track?
I think one of the things that most organizations need to start thinking about is understanding what's causing the expenses. And the more granular detail that can be captured from that, the better you have an opportunity to control it. And in today's world order, people are spending on all sorts of communication services, communications applications, and even in some cases devices to help get them through the communications challenges of work from home and so on and so forth. And so it's important to understand what makes up your expenses, where those dollars and pennies are being spent, and what they're being spent on. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of organizations understand where the expense is from a bottom line, a vendor's perspective. However, it's important, I think, to identify each individual element of the expense so you know where it is, what it's for, how it's being used, so on and so forth. One of the things that's important is thinking about what we refer to as 4 different dimensions of expense management practices, and they are technical, financial, operational, and business impact. And if you understand what the technical aspects are of your environment, how well things are working, what's being used, what's not being used, how it's performing, think of service level agreements and the like, that can be very helpful in understanding it. Again, understanding the dollars and pennies, what are you spending and what are you spending it on and how is it being used? From an operational perspective, think about delivery and how services are getting out to the users and how services and hardware and of course software and how that's being supported. And then also think about how you're supporting those users. And of course, in today's environment, with work from home being so prolific and organizations really in business continuity type practices with their communications, understanding all aspects of operations so that you can understand total cost of ownership as well is very important. And then ultimately, you got to answer the question, how is this impacting the business? Why does all of this exist? Well, communications is needed in order to perform the business functions. And so understanding the relationship of the technical, financial, operational, and business impact elements gives you an opportunity to then line everything up, right? And be able to understand and be able to manage that. Let's take a look at one more slide if we could. One of the things that I want to share from an AOTMP perspective is we keep a close eye on the industry and we want to understand what organizations are spending, what organizations are saving. And savings comes from a lot of different opportunities. It could just simply be overspending. It could be paying a suboptimal price per unit or a price per service. And on average, organizations that have or put in place an expense management practice can save between 7 and 10%, and you see the distribution here in fixed services and mobile services. Now, the caveat I want to put on this is that these are industry averages that AOTMP has identified for many organizations. So as with anything, your results may vary. But one of the things that we're certainly seeing in the market today is as focus on enablement and understanding the cost of that enablement is being put in place, organizations are having great opportunities to not only make sure that they're spending dollar for dollar what they should be, it's optimal, but also identify where there's waste, where there's services that aren't being used, or where there's opportunity to reallocate budget, to support what today's initiatives and what today's objectives are. And I'd be interested, Shawn, if you could share what Tellennium is seeing, both in terms of focus on expense management, and then maybe just relate back to these numbers. These are again AOTMP industry average numbers, but I'd be interested in hearing what Tellennium is doing for its customers.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Tim. Tellennium on average, when we look at year over year what we save our customers, on average we save 28%. And that's a little bit more than what we're seeing in the industry average. So you may ask the question, why? What's the difference? And I think one of the biggest differentiators is just it's in the details. It's understanding not only what you have and what you're spending your money on. You can be very high level, like just going to your ERP system, but you can also get very granular. And a great example, and one of the things that I would like to present today is just not only long-term things that organizations can do to get their budgets back on track, but also some very immediate action items that they can do today to get cash back. And a great example of this, and the reason why we tend to save our clients a little bit more than the industry average, is what we're doing right now with MiFi devices for our clients. What we're finding is many of our clients have a MiFi device, but they also have a smartphone that has an option to be able to use as a hotspot. And so what we're doing is we're understanding the purpose of these MiFis. We're documenting that purpose. And any area where we can actually go out, train that end user on how to use that hotspot, we can actually remove the need for the Wi-Fi because they essentially do the same thing. And so if we're able to cancel that MiFi service, we can save the reoccurring cost, ongoing, but we can actually go and recycle that MiFi device. With this large initiative from work from home, what we're seeing is actually those MiFi devices are bringing a pretty good value right now if you recycle it. So, not only will we go and cancel the service on that MiFi device, we can collect that MiFi, we can recycle it, ensure that all the data on it is destroyed to protect just the data privacy of our customers, and then able to resell that so they get immediate cash back for that physical device. So, that's just one of the practical things that organizations can do right now to be able to lower their expenses is just look, are you paying for duplicate services? And one of the areas that we're looking at in mobility is with those MiFi devices.
That's excellent. Thinking outside the box and evaluating your options are absolutely keys to moving forward. So let's talk about inhibitors to progress. So what are the most common inhibitors? Getting control of an IT budget in a fast-changing environment, much like the one we have now, and how do you overcome them?
Yeah, that's a really nice question and a good jumping off point from what Shawn was sharing here about understanding what services or what devices you have and how they're being used and optimizing that. I think the biggest inhibitor to expense management with technology is really understanding what that single source of truth is. Organizations typically have very good understanding of, I'll say, the bottom line of what they're paying for, what their budget expense is. They spend $100,000 a month with vendor X, they know what that is, they budgeted for it, they pay the bill, they're off to the races. Or folks evaluate that expense and that budget item and maybe go through and do some optimization, and these are standard things that often happen. But the thing that's really kind of interesting, and I think it's really highlighted by what's going on in the world today with business and with communications, is that understanding what is what the real truth is behind any of this is really the most important thing. And when you can really sink your hooks into understanding not just what the goods and services are and what they cost, and having some assurance that they're I'll say the optimal price point, but also understand how they're being used. It's one thing to say, hey, we had we have 100 mobile devices and we used 10,000 minutes of usage, or we sent 10,000 SMS messages, or whatever the parameters are. It's a whole nother level to then dig in and answer that question, why? Why are we doing that? And I think we've all seen, particularly over the past several months, there have been all sorts of changes. There have been spikes, for example, in mobile usage. The big carriers here in the US reported, I believe it was a 40% spike in the month of March. And this is of all users, just in voice minutes. And if you think about everybody that has a mobile device and you think about 40% increase in usage, that's a big deal, right? So understanding what that source of truth is and what that information means, that's a critical factor. And the more visibility you have and the more why questions you can answer, the better control you can have over influencing the outcome, right? And in a lot of organizations that maybe don't have optimal control, what do you do first? You make sure that there's communications connectivity, right? Particularly when you get into business continuity. Whatever it is, has to work, right? People have to be able to talk, people have to be able to commute, people have to be able to compute, not commute, compute and communicate. And so you make sure that everybody's connected and that everybody and the systems are working and so on and so forth. We're kind of past that now, right? We're at a point where people are settling in, and now is a really great time to take a look at everything you have and you say, why are we spending this dollar on this service? And to Shawn's point, is there a different way? Is there a more cost-effective way? Or possibly even is there a way to provide communications to the users, to the people, to the business stakeholders in a more effective way? And these are questions where you don't just answer it once and set it and forget it. You need to be continuously evaluating this. So back to the point, if you have that inventory, if you know what the single source of truth is, you're really empowered then to be able to make the right business changes changes as business changes and as there's dynamic influences such as COVID-19 that are kind of changing the way we communicate and changing the way that business supports. So with that as a narrative and those points to think about, I'm interested in what you can share, Shawn, about how Tellennium helps companies specifically gain that visibility into the single source of truth. How does Tellennium work in supporting inventory and making folks have better visibility into what they have?
Yeah, Tim, I appreciate that question. It's a great question, and it's actually a question that I ask my own clients when I'm with them or prospects. If I'm in a new environment, I'll ask them, I'll say, how's your inventory? And it's amazing the answers I get. And it's almost never as clean as what they think it is when we go in. But that really tells me their level of maturity. Sometimes I walk into a client and they say, we have a 30% accurate inventory, we'd say, or maybe they have a TIM provider, and I'll ask them, at what level of detail is the TIM provider providing on their inventory? Because that really tells me how much savings opportunity is there available. And let me explain this a little bit deeper. One of the things that Tellennium does with every engagement is right at the beginning, we build and we maintain ongoing a very detailed inventory. And we look at a couple of things. So the first thing is we want to know that physical location of that actual circuit or service that's being utilized. And the reason why that's important, maybe you have a location that's shut down where the billing to address is going to an active location, but where that physical asset's located or circuit has been shut down. So that immediately allows us to disconnect unutilized services. The second thing is obviously we want to ensure that it's being billed accurately with the contract and that there's no better rates. That's the typical optimization that you hear about. And yes, we save quite a bit of money because historically, carriers have misbilled their clients, but really going that deeper level of details is where we find a lot of the additional savings that allows us to get that additional 10% from the industry average. And that's understanding the purpose. What is that circuit being used for and why? And Tim, you brought up a great point with mobile, but also on the wireline side, is that circuit going to a fax machine or is it going to a fire alarm? Or is it going to an elevator alarm? Those are important things to note because, if it's going to a fax machine and it hasn't been used in 6 months, well, then we can recommend disconnecting that. Maybe it's not needed. We can bring on an electronic fax means and save money there. But if it's going to an elevator alarm, we don't want to disconnect that if that location's still active, because obviously we'd expect zero usage on there. And we would want to notate that. So understanding what it's used for is very important. Also, I'll say understanding the details like the up speed and download speeds are important for circuits, the granular details, because as we recommend network transformation changes, we need to know those details. So Tellennium automatically builds that in with our inventory. We maintain that ongoing with all of our clients. Because that's really one of the things when we talk to other clients coming from other providers that they're dissatisfied with. They don't feel like they have the inventory that they need. So one of the takeaways that we're going to do with this webinar is actually give away a checklist. You know, kind of rate your own inventory. Do you have these details today? Can you report on them? And then, you know, one other thing that I think is important with your inventory details is also knowing when your contracts expire. So that way things don't go to tariff billing. You know, it's very common for things to be billed a couple $100 and then suddenly the next month they're being charged thousands of dollars. And that's because they went to tariff billing and they went outside of contract. And so Tellennium collects the contract end dates and our system actually proactively sends out notifications saying, hey, these circuits are going to expire with that. And then the last thing that we do with those circuit details after we have them is we actually proactively recommend network optimization. So ways digital transformation so they can stay ahead of the network. You know, we're very engaged in transformations. Maybe they're moving from MPLS to SD-WAN. You know, we can help design that network for them and recommend changes on their behalf. So, you know, in order for us to do that, we have to understand the details, not just the client when we recommend that change.
Those are great considerations. So let's talk even further about definitions and redefining the workspace. TEM commonly refers to telecom expense management. What is the common scope of telecom and how should it be reevaluated?
That's an interesting question, Diane, and I've got a couple of different answers. So on the one hand, I think that there's probably an academic argument to be made of what is telecom, what is IT, so on and so forth. But the reality of it is it's just an academic argument. All of the goods and services that make up the communications estate are part of part of the technology environment, and I think expense management of all these assets needs to be put in play. If you go back 20, 30 years, telecom expense management primarily dealt with voice and data networks. Didn't even really include mobility in the early 90s. I mean, for what mobility was at that point in time. And it was very isolated. But today, we're on a web meeting right here. So we've got audio, we've got visual, we've got screen share, we've got everything. So is this communication, or is this telecommunications, or is it IT, or is it something else? I think having that argument is fine from an academic perspective, and there are a lot of angles you could go. But by casting a wider net and saying, what's in my toolbox that allows my business to communicate? And you mentioned, Shawn, a minute ago, the example of faxes and fax servers, right? All of these are part of the communications estate. And so in order for a fax server to work, there needs to be a server somewhere in the universe. There needs to be a way to access that server. Maybe it's through Wi-Fi or a wireless access point. Maybe it's through a wired connection, any number of variables. And so when AOTMP is thinking about expense management or TEM, I mean, the acronym has been out there, but we want to cast a wide net and think about all of the different use cases. As opposed to simply trying to categorize it, telecom only means X, right? And I think that that's important because, even coming back to this web conference, there are examples. I'll share a little under the covers here. AOTMP uses Office 365, now Microsoft 365, uses Teams, right? And so we use Teams as a communications channel. We use it as a conferencing channel. We use it for our quote unquote phone calls. We use it for messaging and all sorts of sharing. And a lot of organizations do, whether you use that or whether you're a Google shop or pick your platform of choice. And so the real thing is, if we go back to the point I was making earlier, you need to know what you have, where it is, how it's being used, who's consuming it, and answering kind of the fundamental question, is it working? You know, is it helping people communicate in the way in which they intended, right? And so when you cast that wider net, that actually is a bit liberating. It gives you an opportunity to say, okay, let me get my arms around all the different channels and software and hardware and services that are helping my business communicate. And when you can understand that and really get the 360 or the full panoramic view of what's going on there, it's going to make you much more informed about what your communications estate is. And when that happens, coming back to the topic at hand here, that gives you an opportunity to optimize all sorts of things, right? Where if you have the narrow view, I'm just going to deal with telecommunications, and I think that just means voice, and maybe there are modems still out in the world, I don't know, and kind of that stuff. That's great, and that's important. But if you take the blinders off and you get more of that panoramic view, that gives you the opportunity to have much more intel and be able to make smarter decisions, right, about communications and about the expense and the application of those communications. So, in that context, big wide net here. But I'd be interested, Shawn, if you could share what Tellennium thinks of in terms of use cases for expense management, really what your worldview is, and how you help businesses and organizations understand their communications environment.
Yeah, I think, you saw the industry really start off in telecom because the invoices were complex, they were large, and they were dynamic. They were always changing with it, and really with SaaS now being very popular, with IoT, now with utilities being out there in cloud, AWS, Azure, all these different platforms, we're starting to get to the same issue. Multiple different vendors, complex invoices with it. And so, Tellennium has a platform that we say any service, any expense, and any invoice we can process. And we label that as the management of things, because just as you said, it's not telecom anymore. It's the Microsoft Teams that's a part of it. And suddenly, Microsoft is also providing Intunes, which is your MDM management, so it all is layered together. And so having that overall view so they can see that spend, ensure that's being audited, because many times these invoices are just not one particular service anymore. And so they're encompassing multiple services. And so enable to have the platform to be able to support all of those service types is important. We have many clients today that are utilizing us for much more than telecom. Utilities is something out there, and they're paying for what we find is when we go into these organizations, they're either outsourcing part of the invoices to one organization, or they have multiple vendors with that. And so one of the ways organizations can kind of get their budgets back on track is to see if there's some consolidation that can occur. Are we already paying for a vendor that can, for utilities, and maybe another vendor for telecom, and maybe a third vendor for cloud management? Can we consolidate that down to one vendor, save cost, because typically as you go up in scale, provide more services or more spend under management, the costs get cheaper to be able to provide. So, I just challenge organizations to go look at that as a way to cut costs with it. And another thing, maybe they're handling some of those invoices internally right now, and they could go to a Tellennium and outsource it. We recently had a third party that told us today it costs anywhere from $35 to $95 to process an invoice for an organization. You say, wow, that's a huge difference. Why such a difference? Well, if you look at a telecom invoice, if you're really providing the level of detail that's needed to audit that invoice, it could be dozen, 100 pages long. And so what the Tellennium solution does is automate the auditing and allocation and payment of that invoice to be able to streamline it for organizations.
Excellent. And just as the scope of telecom has evolved, we recently experienced a hard shift in mobility as most employers move to a remote workforce. What are organizations doing or thinking about in the mobility arena? So what are one or two actions does Tellennium recommend to organizations seeking greater control over their mobility?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the work from home environment is here to stay, right? I don't think any organization could have guessed that in a month's time, there'd be a 50% increase across the landscape in work from home. We're already getting organizations here within Louisville saying that they're not opening up their corporate offices until 2021. So all of their employees are working from home until 2021. And that with 5G, you're only going to see the increase of mobility. And mobility is really essential to keeping business going. I have my work phone being forwarded to my mobile device right now as I work from home and am on the road traveling. But it's also a means of profit for many of our organizations. Two examples that I can think of organizations using their mobile devices for bringing revenue into the company. One was a lawn care service provider that would actually go out and receive orders on their device. And the second one is a home healthcare company. A lot of our clients are in the home healthcare, and they use that mobile device to keep track of patient records, to do diagnostics, and even thinking outside the box of maybe it's not just the mobile device, maybe it's the diagnostic equipment, heart monitors, dialysis machines that are using IoT. And there's all types of asset trackers out there. One of the things I'm seeing that's occurring is they aren't really tracking that expense, the ongoing expense of having that IoT, but also the equipment. And so we provide here at Tellennium for our clients a full range, what we call a life cycle of a device for our customers. So that includes housing that device at the start, ensuring that when a new employee comes on or a device needs to be replaced, that it's ready to go. It has all the security features loaded onto it for that end user. They get it, they can start using it right away. So that way you don't have any downtime for that user. They have it's instructions, self-intuitive, and we've logged into everything on their behalf. All the way to optimizing that device, to the downturn of the device. When that end user leaves, we can collect that device and be the ones that stores the device, cleans it, recycles the device if it's broken, or reuse it if a new employee comes on. So they're not always paying for equipment. And a very practical way that we help our clients save money that you may not think about is we can actually we sit with our customers and we look at their agreements. Many of our customers will actually get a free or a discounted device every 2 years. And so if that's the case, we can actually be very proactive with our customers and send out notification to their end users and say, hey, go get a new device, go log in, get a new device. Because what we can do is we can take that old device, sell it, get that cash back, what I've referred to at the beginning with that MiFi, get that cash back, give it to the customer, and here they're getting a free device with the carrier contract. So just another way to kind of think outside the box to be able to save money on the whole, device recycling aspect. Does that answer your question, Diane?
Absolutely. So now that we've taken a look at definitions and evolution, how do or should organizations approach leveraging their TEM practice to get back on track? So perhaps maturing their program.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of key data points to think about there. So getting back on track is really about mastering your domain, right? Training, upskilling, understand all of the industry evolution, all of the technology evolution, understanding all of the even sourcing and procurement, evolution and life cycle management practices. That's really what's going to help an organization get their arms around everything and be able to mature their own expense management practice. There's a couple of interesting things to think about here. So the first thing is that let's take sourcing and procurement. Shawn, you mentioned contracts a few minutes ago. And on the surface, a contract is a contract is a contract. You may have a great negotiation team or a sourcing team that can go through that, and there's T's and C's and there's price points, and people do math and they make a decision, and you're off to the races. The interesting thing, though, that I find, particularly with different technologies, is that outside of the contract itself, the ingredients that go into that service are very dynamic. The way in which pieces come together, or the way in which you'd evaluate, for example, an SD-WAN network versus a wireline network, or some other configuration. On the surface, 10,000 foot view, it's kind of the same. But you start getting down into the weeds, it's a completely different animal. And oh, by the way, just for the fun of it, carriers don't kind of follow the same rules in how they orchestrate pricing and how they quote. And so even getting that apples to apples comparison, right, to be able to make decisions is sometimes very, very challenging. And so that presents kind of an interesting data point when we say train, upskill, and master. Well, how do you do that if things are always moving, right? And I think that one thing that AOTMP always recommends is that you use all of the tools and resources to your best advantage to get the job done. And in a lot of cases, that means perhaps partnering with other organizations. That means leveraging subject matter experts to help accelerate results. I've often maintained, and I've used this example probably many times in my life, but I'm kind of a creative guy. I have some stick-to-itiveness. I could probably get anything done if I put my mind to it. But the real business question is, can I get that done? Can I get my action done cost effectively, right? People are smart. Anybody can figure out anything. I'll give them that. But the reality of it is, particularly in today's business environment where organizations are saying, it's Tuesday, what can I do by Friday to make an impact? Not what can I get done by the end of the year? It's what can I do to make an impact today? And that impact, going back to the beginning, could be technical, it could be a financial or an operational, or just a business impact, business enablement opportunity, right? And so I encourage folks to look for subject matter experts and to identify where there are opportunities to leverage that expertise so that you can accelerate the results. Many ways to achieve an end objective, but always think about, what your best hand is, right? What your best play on that hand is, so that you can ultimately get the results you're looking for. And I think in today's environment, as organizations are looking for new and creative ways to tackle common business problems, right? Seeking out subject matter experts that can help you accelerate those results is really a smart move, and it's really a wise move. And with that, I'm interested, Shawn, if you could share some insights as to the subject matter expertise that Tellennium brings to the table, and kind of gear that towards where's your subject matter expertise that can help your customers get better, faster, quicker results.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, because essentially that's what Tellennium does. And we don't only, when we audit and optimize our clients' networks, we don't only just provide the recommendations. This was the number one thing when I managed accounts was, yes, there were savings everywhere, but it was actually acting on those savings. In today's environment, I think IT departments are trying to do more and more and more, support more applications out there, but they have less resources to do it with. And with Tellennium, if someone comes to us, what we do, we'll optimize their spend. We'll provide network optimizations back to them. If they approve those network optimizations, we provide the staff augmentation to get it done. And so that way they're not looking at their own resources trying to get it done. We realize that, hey, if we're going to save more money than the next vendor out there, we actually have to provide that staff augmentation. So that's one of the things that we do. And we're working with a bank right now that's moving all their MPLS locations over to broadband, so they can go into an SD-WAN environment. And literally, they will save $1,200 a location. And so they have come to us and they said, how fast can you go? You know, and so we are rolling out lots of locations every week, because literally every location is an immediate $1,000 a month savings. And so if we roll out 20 more in 1 week, that's a $20,000 additional savings. And so really that just brings into perspective, you know, that staff augmentation, doing things quickly, acting on the savings immediately, makes big results and really affects the budget. So, you know, a couple of things. If what we stated today, if any of this kind of interests an organization or anyone on here, I would really, we're going to be sending out just an inventory checklist. But if you kind of want a free analysis and what are there savings in your environment, we actually have a great program that that we go in, we collect invoices, and the only way that we get paid is if we actually realize real savings for our customers. And so if that interests you, if you want a third party to come say, hey, help me cut costs, help me realize that savings, reach out to us at Tellennium, and we can get engaged right away. And like I said, the way that we get paid is if we realize savings, we just take a small portion of that savings. So really it's a win-win for our clients. And we're seeing that being asked of us more and more from customers in this post-COVID environment.
Excellent. This has been an excellent discussion. Great tips and insights. Thank you both for sharing with us. If you have additional...
Thanks for hosting us, Diane.
Thank you very much. So anyone listening, if you have additional questions for either Tim or Shawn, their contact information is on the screen, and we'll follow up with additional PDFs for those who have attended. Let's see, do we have any questions in chat right now? It doesn't look like we do, unless I'm missing any.
All right, well, great. Thank you for your time, Diane.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Thanks, Shawn. It's been fun. Hope everybody got a couple of good nuggets from this, and certainly looking forward to the follow-up.
Thanks, Tim.